A mood of grim despair is descending on the federal Labor Party as the Gillard government struggles against a sense of looming electoral oblivion come September. Today, one of the Prime Minister's closest allies, the member for Werriwa, Laurie Ferguson, told Julia Gillards directly that Labor is dead unless something changes. He's warning that the party will be annihilated unless the Prime Minister allays public concerns over border protection. His words come amidst another slew of polls foreshadowing a massive Abbott victory in September. In a moment, Laurie Ferguson will join me from Parliament House, but first, political editor Chris Uhlmann reports you can't miss Labor's melancholy mood.
And today I am in a position to say we have listened and we have decided.
Forget the polls. The likely result of September's election is etched in the faces of parliamentarians. Every sitting day, despair seeps from the rows behind the Prime Minister. Labor MPs barely listen to their leaders in question time.
And we believe in terms of the government's carbon pricing scheme.
And the recent attempt to embarrass Tony Abbott over his climate change policy turned into a telling study in each leader's support.
To the member's question, I absolutely confirm to him that I accept the science of climate change.
The question is, how is it best dealt with? The government believes
that is why we have enacted carbon pricing.
That will actually reduce our emissions, our domestic emissions, by 5% by 2020.
That we are aiming as a nation for a 5% reduction in emissions by 2020.
The choice is clear. You can have good environmental protection under the coalition, or you can have a great big new tax and a worse environment under the government.
Tony Abbott is being carried on more than just the voices. Another slew of polls today confirms the government is on track for electoral Armageddon.
These polls seem to be not so much within the margin of error as within the margin of disaster. I don't know how much worse these polls can get. But the Labor MPs I speak to are pretty despondent at the moment.
At the 2010 election, Victoria was Labor's stronghold. Now a mood shift against the government that some Labor MPs detected months ago in Melbourne's southeast is being confirmed by research. The Prime Minister's foot soldiers are forced to hold a weary line.
And the only poll that counts is election day.
But with reports that safe seats like Victoria's Isaacs could fall, there is an I told you so glint in the eyes of those who wanted to replace Julia Gillards with former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd.
I brought the manual with me. I'll see what it says. It says I should say polls come and go, but the only poll that matters is on election day.
The coalition only has to win 3 seats to take government, but a foreshadowed nationwide swing of 8% would deliver it 35 and reduce Labor to a miserable 37 seats.
I do know there's a seminar on in Parliament House this week for retiring MPs. I hope there's not a rush for the door.
In caucus today, one of the Prime Minister's closest allies, Laurie Ferguson, warned that Labor was dead in Western Sydney unless the Prime Minister took personal charge of selling its border protection policy. He said concern about the rise in boat people was reflected in every part of the electorate, including ethnic communities.
I think this is a central issue. It's not the only issue. And I want to emphasise this is not just racist rednecks. These are Muslims, these are Buddhists, these are people from Malaysia, these are people from Bangladesh who convey this to me.
Tony Abbott clearly has one eye firmly on the electoral clock because he knows his deadline to the day, but he's well aware of the difficulty of the ascent.
I've always likened winning an election from opposition to climbing Mount Everest, and we are 102 paces from the summit. But those 102 paces are the hardest paces of all, and one slip, even at that late stage, can be very, very dangerous, even fatal.
It's a tone and a line that's eerily familiar.
We've maybe got to the Everest Base Camp. Maybe we've just got to the lower levels of the rocks and we're climbing up. But you know what I still see? This huge mountain, a lot of snow on top. I see a very clever politician already up there. His name's Mr. Howard.
And despite forecasts that he'll be the only Queenslander left standing after September 14, Kevin Rudd is finding the journey down as arduous as the climb up.
It's tough. Let's just be honest about it. It's very, very tough. I think that's the conversation going on right now with all my parliamentary colleagues who, I've got to say, knowing most of them really well, work their guts out in their communities. So it's really tough going.
But the Prime Minister isn't going anywhere.
Can the Prime Minister confirm the report in the media today that she has been approached by the Foreign Minister to quit her job for the good of the party?
To the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, that report is entirely untrue.
As the government struggles to keep its morbid troops focused, the two independent MPs it's relied on to pass so much of its program have knocked back a bid to increase union right of entry to workplaces.
Unless there's bipartisanship, from my point of view, that is the trigger for success or failure on the passage of legislation at all.
I guess what we're saying is that we're not supporting anything that both the major parties won't support in terms of each other.
But that rule apparently doesn't apply to all legislation. Both men intend to support the government's education reform bill due up soon, even though it's opposed by the coalition and so far only supported by 2 states and 1 territory. And speaking of state against state, Anthony Albanese and Wayne Swan suited up today ahead of the Rugby League State of Origin battle tomorrow night.
That's a bad sight. No tonguey.
Anthony Albanese launched a torpedo in the general direction of the head of the AFL. Andrew Demetriou's drop punt was a touch more accurate. At least someone in Labor has something to smile about.